Patricia Voss didn't knock. She never knocked. She walked straight to Deshawn's station, looked at the old man sitting in the chair, cape around his shoulders, silver hair half trimmed, and then looked at Deshawn like he was something she'd stepped in. "Really, Deshawn?" Her voice was bright, almost amused. "A walk-in off the street. No booking, no consultation, no nothing. Just some random old man you pulled in from the sidewalk." She tilted her head. "I have to ask, is this a black thing? Because I have never once seen any of my other stylists pull a stranger in off the street and sit them down like this is a soup kitchen." The salon went silent. Not quiet. Silent. She reached over and swept the clippers off the counter. They hit the tile with a crack that echoed. "Pack your station." What Deshawn did next cost him everything, and then gave him back something far greater. Stay with this story. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed, don't leave yet. You'll want to see how this ends. The alarm went off at 5:20 a.m., but Deshawn Carter was already awake. He'd been awake since 4:47, lying on his back in the dark, staring at the water stain on the ceiling of his bedroom, the one shaped vaguely like the state of Florida that had been there since before he moved in and would probably be there long after he left. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of a garbage truck working its way down Pryor Street. He got up without hitting snooze. He never hit snooze. By 5:30, he was standing at the bathroom sink, running his clippers under warm water the way his grandfather had taught him. Slow, deliberate, like you were cleaning something sacred. Each guard wiped down with a white cloth, dried, placed back in the case in order of size, left to right. Always left to right. Raymond Carter had done it that way for 20 years in the Army, and he'd passed the habit down to his grandson, the same way he'd passed down the clippers themselves. Without ceremony, just a hand extended across a kitchen table and 4 words: "Take care of these." Deshawn took care of them. He opened his phone while the coffee brewed, checked his bank account the way you check a wound, carefully, already knowing it's going to hurt. The number looked back at him from the screen. $203. Rent was $940, due in 10 days. He closed the app and poured his coffee. Loretta Carter shuffled into the kitchen in her house slippers and a housecoat the color of old mustard, already mid-sentence before she reached the counter. "You polish those things any harder," she said, nodding at the clipper case open on the kitchen table. "You're going to rub the chrome right off." "Morning, Grandma." "Morning." She poured herself a cup without asking, added 2 sugars, stirred with the handle of a spoon because all the actual spoons were in the drying rack, and she didn't want to walk that far. "What time's your first client?" 8:30, Mrs. Delacroix, touch up and trim. "She tip decent?" "She tips in prayer and compliments." Loretta made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Tell her we're behind on rent and see if the Lord sends cash." Deshawn smiled, closed the clipper case, and looked up at the mantelpiece in the living room doorway. It was visible from where he sat. It always was. A single framed photograph. Staff Sergeant Raymond Carter in Army dress uniform, chest full of commendations, face serious the way men of that generation were serious in photographs, like smiling was something you saved for people you actually knew. He'd spent 20 years as a barber for his entire unit, bases in Georgia, Germany, South Korea, and 2 tours in places he never talked about to anyone except Loretta. He never charged a soldier a single dollar. Not once. Not for 20 years. Deshawn had inherited 2 things from Raymond Carter when he passed 6 years ago. The clipper case, and the belief that the chair doesn't get to choose who sits in it. He grabbed his bag, kissed Loretta on the top of her head, and walked out into the gray Atlanta morning. The bus ran late, which it always did on Tuesdays, and Deshawn stood at the stop on Glenwood Avenue with his earbuds in, watching the neighborhood scroll past through the scratched plexiglass window once he finally boarded. Southside Atlanta was changing. Had been changing for 3 years, fast enough that you could almost watch it happening if you stood still long enough. New breweries and yoga studios opening on blocks where the laundromats and corner fish spots used to be. Property values climbing. Old faces disappearing. Premier Image Salon and Spa sat right on that edge. Peachtree corridor, glass front, white lettering, black orchids in the window boxes. From the outside, it looked like it belonged in Buckhead. Inside, it smelled like developer solution and eucalyptus oil and the specific kind of money that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. Deshawn's station was the smallest in the building. Tucked near the back, next to the supply closet, a location that had been assigned to him on his first day 2 years ago and had never been revisited despite the fact that his client waitlist was longer than anyone else on the floor. Seniority, Patricia Voss explained whenever the topic came up, which wasn't often because Deshawn didn't raise it often. Seniority and fit. He had the talent. She'd give him that. But fit took time. He opened his station drawer and touched the notebook underneath the spare guards and the extra cape. Black cover, pages dense with sketches, floor plans, chair layouts, a hand-lettered logo he'd redrawn at least a dozen times. Carter's, every chair, every person. A shop where nobody got turned away because of what was in their wallet or what they looked like walking through the door. He'd been building it on paper since cosmetology school, where he'd graduated second in his class and collected $21,000 in student debt that followed him like a second shadow everywhere he went. He closed the drawer when he heard Patricia's heels on the marble. She gathered the stylists near reception at 8:15 before the first clients arrived. Fresh flowers on the counter, new signage in the window. Her voice was the particular kind of pleasant that meant she wanted something. "Big week," she said. "City fundraiser crowd is coming Saturday. Council members, donors, press. I need this place looking like the investment it is." She paused, making deliberate eye contact with each of them in turn. "Booked clients only. No walk-ins, no exceptions, no charity cases." Another pause. "I need the right energy in here. You all know what I mean." Janelle, at the station next to Deshawn's, leaned over after Patricia clicked away. "She means she doesn't want the wrong kind of people in here when the money shows up," Janelle said quietly, not looking at him. Deshawn didn't respond. His eyes moved to the front door, to the street beyond the glass, to the ordinary Tuesday morning foot traffic passing by outside. He didn't know yet that one of those ordinary people was about to walk in and change everything. The door opened at 2:17 p.m. Deshawn was between clients, wiping down his station, when he heard the bell above the entrance. He looked up the way you look up at any sound in a quiet room, automatically, without expectation. The man who walked in was 74 years old. Though he carried himself like someone who had once been much larger and had slowly, over years, been asked to take up less space. His jacket was clean but worn thin at the elbows, the kind of garment that had been good once and was being asked to keep being good, long past its natural lifespan. On the left lapel, a small Army veteran pin, the kind you could buy at any VFW post for $3. But the way he wore it suggested it was worth considerably more than that. His silver hair had grown past his collar, curling unevenly at the ears, and his hands, large, weathered, the hands of a man who had done physical work for most of his life, trembled slightly at his sides. He stopped just inside the door, looked around the salon with the careful expression of a man who already suspected He was in the wrong place but was too tired to turn back immediately. The receptionist looked up, looked him over. The jacket, the hair, the trembling hands. Looked back down at her screen. Frank Odom stood at the counter for a full 10 seconds before she acknowledged him. "Can I help you?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice was steady, courteous, the voice of a man who had been taught to be polite to everyone regardless of how they treated him. "I think I took the wrong bus. I'm trying to get to the VA clinic on Memorial Drive. Could you point me in the right direction?" The receptionist waved vaguely toward the window. "Few blocks south, I think. Maybe 3. She was already looking back at her screen. Frank nodded. "Thank you." He turned to leave. He had taken 2 steps toward the door when Deshawn crossed the salon floor. He didn't think about it. He didn't weigh it against Patricia's instructions from that morning or calculate what it might cost him. He just moved, the way you move when something is simply the obvious thing to do. "Sir?" Frank stopped. Deshawn looked at the pin on his lapel, at the overgrown silver hair, at the particular way the old man was holding himself, straight-backed, dignified, like he was standing at attention for an inspection that nobody else in the room had the decency to conduct. "When's the last time you had a proper cut?" Frank blinked. "Oh, I'm not here for... I've got an open chair," Deshawn said. "Sit down." A pause. Frank looked at the chair, looked at Deshawn, looked at the door. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble. You're a client." Deshawn gestured toward the station. "Come on." Frank Odom sat down. Deshawn draped the cape around the old man's shoulders and ran warm water through his hair at the back sink, fingers moving the way Raymond had taught him. Slow first, reading the scalp, finding the natural lines before the clippers touched anything. Frank sat with his eyes closed, and for a moment the tension in his jaw, which Deshawn hadn't even noticed until it released, simply let go. "How long has it been?" Deshawn asked quietly. "Since a real haircut?" A pause. "Little over a year, I think." "Long time. Didn't seem to matter much." Frank was quiet for a moment. "My wife Margaret used to keep track. Every 3 weeks, like a standing appointment she'd made with the universe. She'd look at me over breakfast and say, 'Frank, you're starting to look like you belong on a park bench,' and I'd call the barber that afternoon." A small, fractured sound that was almost a laugh. "She passed 14 months ago. After that, I just stopped keeping track of things like that." Deshawn's hands kept moving. "I'm sorry about your wife, sir." "She was something." Frank's voice thinned at the edges. "Kept everything running. The house, the calendar, me. After she was gone, I'd sit in the same chair every morning and look at the same window and just forget what day it was." The clippers hummed. Hair fell. The noise of the salon receded to something distant and unimportant. "My grandfather was in the army," Deshawn said. "Barber for his whole unit. 20 years. He always told me the best conversations in the world happen in a barber's chair, because it's the one place where a man will actually sit still long enough to say something true." Frank opened his eyes and looked at Deshawn's reflection in the mirror. "Smart man, your grandfather. The smartest I ever knew." He worked in focused silence for a while, shaping the fade above the ears, cleaning the neckline with the precision that had built his reputation in this salon, one client at a time. When he stepped back, the man in the mirror was different, sharper, cleaner, present in a way he hadn't been when he walked through the door. Frank stared at his own reflection for a long moment, like he was trying to remember the last time he'd looked like himself. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside, a $5 bill, 2 singles, and some loose change. Maybe $7 total. He counted it carefully, the way you count money when there isn't much of it, and held it out. Deshawn placed his hand over the old man's. "This one's on me, sir. Thank you for your service." Frank's chin moved. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he reached into his breast pocket and produced a small photograph, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, laughing at something just outside the frame of the picture. The kind of laugh that suggested whoever was holding the camera had just said something only she would find that funny. "Margaret," he said quietly. "She would have liked you." He put the photograph back, stood slowly, and nodded once, the kind of nod that contains more than words can carry, and walked toward the door. Deshawn watched him go. The clippers were still warm in his hand when he heard heels on the marble behind him. Patricia Voss did not raise her voice in the office. That was the thing about her. She never needed to. She had a way of delivering devastation at conversational volume, each word placed with the deliberate care of someone who had done this before and found that calm worked better than fury, more permanent, less contestable. She sat behind her desk and gestured for Deshawn to close the door. He did. She did not offer him a seat. He stood. "I'm going to be straightforward with you," she began, folding her hands on the desk. "What happened out there today wasn't a surprise. It was the latest in a pattern I've been documenting for some time. Unauthorized service discounts in February. A walk-in you took in March when I had explicitly told the floor we were at capacity. And now this." She paused. "A non-client. No booking, no consultation, no payment. Just a stranger you pulled in off the street. He's a veteran," Deshawn said. "He needed a haircut. And I need a business." Her voice didn't change. "I need chairs that generate revenue, not goodwill. I need a floor that reflects the brand we've built here. What you did today, in front of clients, in front of staff, on a week when I have specifically asked everyone to be at their professional best, is not something I can absorb." It was a $15 haircut. It was a statement. She opened a desk drawer, produced a manila envelope, slid it across the desk. "Final paycheck through yesterday. Your last 2 weeks of bookings will be redistributed. I'd like your station cleared within the hour." Deshawn looked at the envelope. He looked at Patricia. He picked up the envelope. "You know what he said to me?" Deshawn's voice was even. "That old man. He said the last time someone took care of him was when his wife was alive. She passed 14 months ago. He's been alone since then." Patricia's expression did not change. "That's a sad story. It's not my responsibility." Deshawn nodded once. "No," he said. "I guess it isn't." He turned and walked out of the office. At his station, he packed methodically. Clippers first, in their case left to right. Then the guards, the spray bottle, the detailing scissors in the roll pouch. The spare cape folded into thirds. The notebook last. Black cover, pages dense with sketches. 3 years of a dream folded between them. He tucked it under his arm. Janelle stood at her station, back half-turned, jaw tight. She watched him pack in her peripheral vision and said nothing. The other stylists found things to look at on their phones, on their stations, on the ceiling. Not one of them spoke. He picked up the tip jar from the edge of his station, a glass mason jar, his name written on a strip of tape along the bottom, $34 in small bills from the day's clients. He was almost to the end of the station when Patricia's voice came from behind him. "Deshawn." He stopped. "The tip jar." She was standing in the doorway of her office, arms crossed. "That stays. House policy. Tips collected at the station belong to the salon during paid working hours." The salon went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet before. This was not the silence of shock. This was the silence of people who were pretending very hard not to be watching. Deshawn looked at the jar. $34. His clients, his hands, his time. He set the jar on the station counter without a word. Patricia said nothing further. She went back into her office and closed the door. Deshawn picked up his bag, his clipper case, his notebook, and walked the length of the salon floor to the front door. He did not look at the other stylists. He pushed through the door into the afternoon light, and the bell above the entrance rang once, bright and indifferent, the way it rang for everyone. He was home by 4:38 p.m. Loretta was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a crossword puzzle she'd been working on since lunch. She looked up when he came through the door, read his face the way she'd been reading it since he was 7 years old. Fast, accurate, no second look required. She set her pen down. He told her everything. Sitting at the table, bag still on his shoulder, he laid it out flat. The old man, the haircut, Patricia's office, the tip jar, the walkout. No embellishment. No tears. Just the facts in the order they happened. Loretta didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You did what your grandfather would have done," she said. "Don't you dare feel ashamed." "I'm not ashamed, Grandma." He set the bag down. "I'm broke." The math was what it was. $203 in the account. Rent $940 in 10 days. No paycheck coming. 3 months of barely keeping up, suddenly becoming something much worse than barely. That night, Deshawn sat at the kitchen table with his phone and a handwritten list of every salon and barbershop within reasonable distance. He called 11. The first 6 weren't hiring. The 7th said they'd call back. They didn't. The 8th said they needed someone with more management experience. The 9th answered on the second ring. The owner, a man named Gerald who ran a shop in Decatur, listened politely until Deshawn mentioned Premier Image. A pause. Then, "Patricia Voss's place?" "Yes, sir. I was there 2 years. Another pause. Longer this time. "Son, Patricia called around yesterday. Told folks you had a history of insubordination, giving away services without authorization, undermining the client experience. Said it wasn't a one-time thing." His voice was not unkind. "I can't bring that into my shop. I'm sorry." The line went dead. Deshawn stared at the phone in his hand. Not just fired, blacklisted. By the time she'd dismissed him, Patricia Voss had already been on the phone, quietly, methodically, closing every door in the city. From the living room, Loretta's voice came soft and careful. "Baby, did that old man say his last name?" Deshawn looked up. "Odom. Said his name was Frank Odom." Loretta didn't respond right away. She was quiet for a moment that lasted a few seconds longer than a normal pause, the kind of quiet that means something is turning over behind someone's eyes. "Odom," she repeated, almost to herself. "You know him?" "No," she said. "No, I don't." She picked up her crossword and went back to it, but she didn't write anything down. On the 7th day after losing his job, Deshawn Carter carried a folding chair out the front door of Loretta's house and set it on the sidewalk. It was a metal chair, the kind that folds flat and weighs nothing and has no opinion about where it ends up. He positioned it near the stoop, angled slightly toward the street so clients could see their reflection in the glass of the front door. Not ideal, but workable. He'd worked with less. The extension cord was the orange kind, the heavy-duty outdoor variety 25 feet long. He ran it from the outlet in the living room, through the window on the second floor, threading it carefully through a small notch he'd cut into the corner of the window screen with a box cutter, and let it drop down the brick exterior wall, where he'd taped it flat against the surface every 18 inches with electrical tape to keep it from swinging. It ran down to the first floor, across 6 feet of sidewalk, and plugged into a power strip beside the folding chair. The whole setup took 40 minutes and looked exactly like what it was: a man solving a problem with whatever he had available. He wrote the sign by hand on the back of a cardboard box flap, block letters in black marker. Cuts. Pay what you can. He leaned it against the stoop and sat down to wait. The first customer arrived 11 minutes later. Mr. Bernard Hayes from the apartment next door, 69 years old, retired Atlanta Transit Authority bus driver, a man who had been meaning to get a haircut for 6 weeks and kept not getting around to it. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the sign, looked at Deshawn, looked at the sign again. "How much is what you can?" "Whatever you got, Mr. Bernard." Bernard reached into his pocket, produced $3 bills and a warm can of Sprite he'd been carrying, for reasons he didn't explain, and handed them over. Deshawn took the money, set the Sprite on the stoop, and went to work. Bernard left 20 minutes later, touching the back of his neck with one hand, walking with the particular straightness of a man who has just been reminded what it feels like to look like himself. "I'm sending everybody I know," he said, without turning around. He did. By day 3, there was a line. It formed early, before Deshawn had finished setting up. A loose gathering of men from the neighborhood who had heard from Bernard, or from someone Bernard had told, or from someone that person had told. Elderly men from the Greater Bethel AME Church 2 streets over, who came in groups of 2 and 3 and sat on the stoop steps waiting their turn with the patience of people who had learned long ago how to wait. A 16-year-old named Trey Washington, who needed a shape-up before a job interview at the Kroger on Cleveland Avenue, his first real interview, his good shirt already on at 8:30 in the morning. A father of 4 named Marcus, who paid with a cloth bag of dried pinto beans and a mason jar of his mother's peach preserves, and an apology that Deshawn waved off before he could finish it. "Don't apologize," Deshawn said. "Sit down." Loretta appeared at the front door on day 2 with a plastic pitcher of sweet tea and a card table she'd dragged from the back bedroom. She set it up beside the chair without asking, poured the first cup, and handed it to the man waiting next in line. She did not make an announcement about this. She simply did it, the way she did most things, without fanfare, as if it had always been the plan. Mr. Willis from across the street dragged over a lawn chair and a portable radio on day 3 and tuned it to the oldies station and didn't ask permission. By the end of the first week, the sidewalk in front of Loretta Carter's house looked less like a makeshift barber shop and more like a block gathering that happened to include haircuts. The radio played. The sweet tea went around. People laughed at things. Deshawn wasn't making real money. Some days it was $40, some days $11. One day a bag of rice, a can of coffee, and a handshake from a man named Earl, who said he'd pay Deshawn back when his pension came through. He meant it sincerely, and Deshawn believed him. The notebook came out at night, and the floor plans for Carter's started filling in faster. More specifically, chair placement, lighting angles, a waiting area near the window where the morning sun would come through strong and clean. On day 9, Frank Odom walked up the sidewalk. He'd come by bus, 2 transfers, hat in hand, moving slowly but with intention. He stopped at the edge of the small crowd and stood there until Deshawn noticed him. The old man looked like he hadn't slept well. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "I asked at the salon. They wouldn't tell me anything. I asked at the VA clinic. Finally, a woman at the bus stop on MLK recognized your description and pointed me this way. He paused. I didn't mean to cause you trouble, son. If I hadn't walked in that door... Deshaun was mid-fade on a 10-year-old boy named Jalen, who would not stop moving his head. He didn't look up. You didn't cause anything, Mr. Frank, he said evenly. She made her choice. I made mine. He did look up then, briefly, meeting the old man's eyes. I'd make the same one tomorrow. Frank stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hat turning slowly in his hands. Then he walked over to the stoop and sat down and waited. The way you wait when you don't feel you have the right to ask for anything, but you need to be somewhere specific. When Jalen was done and had been released back into the wild, Deshaun cleaned the chair and looked at Frank. You're next, Mr. Frank. I can't keep letting you... Sit down. Frank sat. Deshaun draped the cape. The clippers hummed and the radio played something slow, and the afternoon light came down warm and even across the sidewalk. Loretta watched from the second-floor window and said nothing. But she smiled. 4 days after that, a white news van with a Channel 9 logo rolled slowly down the block and stopped at the curb. Calvin Marsh had been a reporter at Channel 9 for 6 years, long enough to know the difference between a story and a moment. Most of what he covered was moments. Gas leaks, traffic pileups, ribbon cuttings, the kind of content that filled airtime between commercials and was forgotten by morning. He'd been 2 streets over covering a gas main break on Aline Avenue when his producer sent him to fill the rest of the afternoon slot with something softer. Human interest, she said. Something warm. It's a Tuesday. He turned down Pryor Street looking for nothing in particular and saw the line. 15 people on a sidewalk in front of a 2-story rental house. A folding chair, a man with clippers, a card table with a pitcher of sweet tea, a portable radio playing something from 1968, an old man on the stoop reading a folded newspaper. Calvin pulled over and watched for 12 minutes without getting out of the van. He watched the way Deshaun moved, efficient, unhurried, talking to the man in the chair with his full attention, the way most people can't manage even without clippers in their hands. He watched the line move. He watched Loretta refill the pitcher from a window, leaning out over the second-floor sill to pass it down to a woman on the stoop below. Then he got out. Excuse me. He approached with his press badge visible, voice easy. Calvin Marsh, Channel 9. Mind if I ask what's going on here? Deshaun looked at the microphone the way you look at something that has the potential to make your life significantly more complicated. Just cutting hair on the sidewalk. On the sidewalk, Calvin repeated. That's what I said. There's a story here. Calvin kept his voice level, no pressure in it. Would you let me do a short segment? Human interest. 5 minutes of your time. I'm not looking for attention. From the second-floor window, without warning, Loretta's voice came down to the sidewalk like a verdict. Tell the truth, baby. The truth doesn't need a publicist. Deshaun looked up at her. She was already pulling the window closed. He looked at the line of people behind him. Mr. Bernard, Trey. Mr. Willis in his lawn chair. A woman named Gloria who'd brought her grandson for the 3rd week in a row. People who had shown up for him when no institution, no employer, no professional network had. 5 minutes, Deshaun said. I'm not trashing anybody. I'm not performing. I just say what's true. That's all I want, Calvin said. The segment took 11 minutes to shoot. Deshaun stood in front of the folding chair, clippers at his side, and spoke the way he cut hair. Without waste, without decoration, without anything that wasn't necessary. I was raised to believe that when someone needs help and you can help, you help. That's not a policy. That's just how you live. I helped a veteran who needed a haircut. I'd do it again tomorrow. And because of that, I lost my job. I got blacklisted from every salon in this city, and now I'm cutting hair on a sidewalk trying to figure out how to keep the lights on. A pause. But I'm still here, and so are they. He gestured toward the line without looking at it. Calvin turned the camera to Frank, who was sitting on the stoop with a glass of sweet tea balanced carefully on his knee. He hadn't been asked. He'd simply been there. And Calvin had asked if he'd say a few words, and Frank had agreed in the way of men who are not accustomed to being asked for anything and find the question slightly disorienting. "This young man treated me like a person," Frank said. His voice was steady but thin at the edges, like paper held up to the light. "That's all he did. He saw me standing there and he treated me like a person. Not one other person in that building even looked at me." He paused, looked down at his tea. "I've been coming back every week since, because this is the first place in a long time that felt like somewhere I was supposed to be." Calvin thanked them both. He drove back to the station and sat in the edit bay for 2 hours. The segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. By 8 p.m. it had been shared 340 times across local Facebook groups. By 10 p.m., a Twitter account with 80,000 followers had posted the clip with the caption, "This man lost his job for giving a veteran a free haircut. Atlanta needs to know about this." By midnight, it had 6,400 views. By 7 a.m. the next morning, that number was 14,000, and 3 local morning shows were making calls. 12 miles across Atlanta, Mayor Stephen Odom was at a donor dinner at a private event space in Buckhead when his chief of staff, a precise and unflappable woman named Rebecca, appeared at his elbow and slid a phone onto the table beside his water glass. "You need to see this," she said quietly, "when you have a moment." Stephen picked it up during a lull between courses, half expecting a budget alert or a scheduling conflict. He pressed play. A news clip, some human interest piece about a barber and a sidewalk in Southside. He watched with the detached attention of a man processing his 14th piece of information in the last hour. Then the camera moved to the stoop. His fork stopped moving. The old man on the screen had silver hair, newly cut, sitting with a glass of sweet tea and the particular straight-backed posture of someone who'd spent years being told to stand correctly. Pale blue eyes, large weathered hands wrapped around the glass. Stephen set the phone face down on the table, picked it up again, watched the last 40 seconds one more time. He excused himself from the table, walked to the corridor outside the event space, and called his sister. Diane picked up on the second ring. Before he could speak, she said, "I know. I've been watching it for an hour. And before you say anything, I've been telling you, Stephen. I have been telling you for 2 years." The corridor was very quiet. "That's Dad," Stephen said. "Yes," Diane said. "It is." Across the city, in a home office with the lights still on, Councilman Gerald Pruitt set his wine glass down on the desk, very carefully, and reached for his phone with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has just recognized an opportunity he did not expect and does not intend to waste. Gerald Pruitt held his press conference at 9 a.m. on the steps of Atlanta City Hall. He arrived 7 minutes early, which he never did, and arranged himself behind the cluster of microphones with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 2 decades making sure he was standing in the right place when the light came on. 3 local TV cameras, 2 radio reporters, a handful of print journalists. Not a massive turnout, but Pruitt hadn't needed massive. He'd needed present. Mayor Odom has made caring for the vulnerable the cornerstone of his administration, Pruitt began, his voice measured and grave, the voice he used when he wanted to sound reluctant to be saying something he was absolutely delighted to be saying. He has asked Atlanta to trust him with its most marginalized residents, its veterans, its working poor, its communities of color. A pause for the cameras to settle. But while the mayor was giving speeches about community investment, his own father, a veteran, a man who served this country, was living alone on Glenwood Avenue, isolated and struggling. And a 28-year-old black barber lost his livelihood for doing what the mayor's own family apparently couldn't be bothered to do. He looked directly into the nearest camera, showing Frank Odom basic human decency. He let it land. "Where was the mayor?" Pruitt said. "Where was the sun?" The story detonated. By noon, 2 national outlets had picked it up. By evening, 5. Social media split the way social media always splits. Fast, loud, and along lines that had very little to do with the actual facts of what had happened on Pryor Street. On one side, Deshaun Carter was a hero, Patricia Voss was a villain, the mayor was a hypocrite, and the whole thing was a damning indictment of everything wrong with the city. On the other side, the entire story was staged. Deshaun was an opportunist, the veteran was an actor, and someone was definitely running a GoFundMe scam. Neither side was entirely right. Both sides were entirely certain. The ugliness arrived the way it always arrives, anonymously, in volume, from directions you can't anticipate. Deshaun's personal Instagram account, which he'd barely used in 2 years, was flooded overnight with comments that he stopped reading after the first 12. His phone number, pulled from an old online listing for a previous job, was posted in 3 separate threads. Someone called the house at 2:30 in the morning and breathed into the phone for 4 seconds before hanging up. On Thursday morning, Deshaun came downstairs before Loretta was awake to set up the sidewalk chair. The garage door on the side of the house faced the alley. He saw it from the driveway. A single word, spray-painted in red. The worst one. He stood there for 10 seconds, just 10. Then he went back inside, got a bucket of warm, soapy water and a stiff, bristled brush, and scrubbed it off the metal door before Loretta came down for her morning coffee. The paint was still wet enough that it came off without leaving a ghost. He rinsed the door, dried it with an old towel, and had the folding chair set up on the sidewalk by 7:45. He didn't tell Loretta. 2 days later, Patricia Voss appeared on a local talk radio program called Atlanta Straight Talk, a mid-morning show with a loyal listenership and a host named Doug Fellers, who had a gift for asking questions that sounded neutral and weren't. Patricia's voice on the radio was smooth, rehearsed, the voice of a woman who had prepared for this conversation for several days and was delivering it as though it were spontaneous. Deshaun Carter was let go for repeated violations of salon policy, she said. The incident with the walk-in was the most recent. It was not the only one. I run a professional establishment. I have a responsibility to my clients, my staff, and my business. This has been characterized as a story about a free haircut. It isn't. It's a story about an employee who consistently chose his own judgment over the professional standards of the workplace. Fellers. And you stand by the decision? Patricia. Completely. Deshaun listened to the clip on his phone in his bedroom that night, sitting on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees. His hands were steady. That was the thing that surprised him. How steady his hands were. Because what he felt was not anger exactly. It was something quieter and more damaging. The sensation of being unmade, of having a version of yourself constructed in public by someone else, out of materials you never provided, and having no mechanism to correct it. Loretta appeared in the doorway. She looked at the phone, looked at his face, and crossed the room. She took the phone out of his hand and turned it face down on the nightstand. "She doesn't have the pen, baby," she said. "She's just making noise." The woman in the blazer appeared at the sidewalk chair on Friday morning. She was professional in the specific way of people whose professionalism is itself a kind of pressure. The blazer, the business card extended with both hands, the smile calibrated to project warmth without committing to it. The card read, Harmon and Associates, Community Advocacy Partners. Mr. Carter, my name is Teresa Harmon. I represent a coalition of community organizations that have been following your situation closely. We'd like to help. She outlined the offer with practiced efficiency. Pro bono wrongful termination lawsuit against Premier Image Salon. National media placement. A structured legal defense fund. Full representation from filing through resolution. We believe in your story, she said. We want to make this right. It sounded like rescue. It smelled like something else entirely. Deshawn took the card. He thanked her. He waited until she was back in her car before he turned it over in his fingers and read the fine print on the back. That night, he set it on the kitchen table in front of Loretta. She picked it up, turned it over, read both sides. Ask yourself one question, she said, setting it back down. If you go to war, who gets stronger? Deshawn looked at the card for a long moment. Not me, he said. Loretta nodded. No, she said. Not you. Then, the next morning, there was a knock at the front door. Deshawn opened it to find Frank Odom on the stoop. He was not wearing his jacket. His hands, which usually trembled slightly, were steadier than Deshawn had ever seen them. His face carried the specific expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally decided to set it down, regardless of the consequences. There's something I need to tell you, Frank said. Can I come in? Deshawn stepped aside and Frank walked in. Loretta was at the kitchen table with her morning coffee and her crossword puzzle. She looked up, read Frank's face the same way she read everything, fast, thorough, no second pass needed. She set her pen down without being asked and pushed the chair across from her out with her foot. Sit down, Mr. Frank, she said. I'll get you a cup. Frank sat. He placed his hat on the table in front of him and folded his hands around it, a man arranging himself before saying something difficult. Deshawn sat across from him. Loretta set a mug of coffee on the table, pulled her own chair slightly back, and said nothing. She had the gift of knowing when a room needed her presence and when it needed her silence. Frank looked at his coffee for a long moment. My son is the mayor, he said. The kitchen went still, not quiet. Still. The refrigerator hum seemed to stop. The radio Loretta kept on low in the mornings seemed to recede to somewhere very far away. Deshawn looked at Frank. Frank was looking at the table. Stephen Odom, Frank said. He's my son. We haven't spoken in 7 years, not since his mother's funeral. He paused. He arrived 80 minutes late. He had a campaign event that morning, a fundraiser. He thought he could do both. Another pause. He couldn't, but he tried. And after that, we never found the way back to each other. Deshawn said nothing. He waited. I'm telling you this, Frank continued, because you deserve to know the truth of what's happening. This isn't about a haircut anymore. It hasn't been about a haircut since Gerald Pruitt held that press conference. They're using you, son, not because they care about what Patricia Voss did to you, because hurting you is the fastest way to hurt Stephen right now. He finally looked up. And you didn't sign up for that. Neither did I. The kitchen stayed still for another moment. Then Deshawn leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. How long have you known, he asked, that he was the mayor? Since before I walked into that salon, Frank said simply. I didn't go there to make trouble. I genuinely took the wrong bus. I genuinely needed directions. A pause. And I genuinely needed a haircut. That part was true too. Loretta, from her corner of the table, spoke without looking up from the crossword she'd picked back up. What do you need from us, Mr. Frank? Frank looked at her. Nothing. I don't need anything. I just needed him to know. He looked at Deshawn. What you do with it is your business. Deshawn called Teresa Harmon at Harmon & Associates at 8:47 that morning. She answered on the first ring, which told him she'd been waiting. Mr. Carter, I'm so glad you... I appreciate the offer, Deshawn said. I'm not interested. A pause. Deshawn, I want you to understand what we're prepared to do for you. The legal team alone is... I understand what you're prepared to do, he said. And I understand what you need me to do to make it worth your while. I'm not going to be used as a weapon against an old man's son. He paused. That's my answer. It's not going to change. He ended the call. Loretta, from the living room doorway, nodded once. Your grandfather, she said, would have said the exact same thing, in the exact same tone. Frank Odom had not asked his daughter for anything in 7 years. Not money, not company, not even a phone call on his birthday. He was a proud man, and pride had a way of constructing walls that looked like dignity from the outside and felt like solitary confinement from within. But on a Friday afternoon, he took the bus to Diane Odom Reed's house in Sandy Springs, knocked on the door, and sat down at her kitchen table and told her everything. He told her about the haircut, about Deshawn's hands in the warm water, and the 20 minutes in the chair that had made him feel, for the first time in 14 months, like someone who existed in the world rather than simply persisting in it. He told her about the firing, the blacklist, the spray paint on the garage door that Deshawn had scrubbed off before sunrise so his grandmother wouldn't see it. He told her about the sidewalk chair and the sweet tea and the line of neighbors every morning. And then he told her about the phone call. They offered him money to go after Stephen publicly, Frank said. A lawsuit, national television, the whole thing. He turned it down flat. Said he wouldn't be used as a weapon against an old man's son. Frank shook his head slowly. 28 years old. $200 in his bank account. Rent due in a week. And he still said no. Diane sat across from her father and watched his face. She hadn't seen him this present, this animated, this here, since before Margaret died, since before the silence swallowed everything. Dad, she said carefully, what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to talk to your brother, Frank said. I'm not asking you to fix what's broken between him and me. I've made my peace with how things are. But this boy doesn't deserve what's happening to him. And Stephen is the only person in this city with the standing to do something about it. Diane drove to City Hall that afternoon without calling ahead. She walked past Stephen's assistant with the particular authority that belongs only to people who knew you before you were important. And she closed the office door behind her. Stephen looked up from his desk. Diane, I'm in the middle of... Dad came to see me, she said. He stopped. She sat down across from him, uninvited, and told him everything Frank had told her. She did not soften it. She did not editorialize. She laid it out the same way Frank had. In order, without decoration, fact after fact after fact. When she finished, Stephen said nothing. His hands were flat on the desk. His face was a controlled surface with something moving hard underneath it. Diane stood. She was at the door when she turned back. He's not angry at you, Stephen, she said. He told that reporter on camera that he's proud of you. The whole city heard it. Her voice softened by 1 degree. But proud doesn't mean okay. And okay doesn't mean fine. And sitting in that apartment alone doesn't mean he's all right. The door clicked shut. Stephen sat in the silence for a very long time. Calvin Marsh was working late on a Thursday when he pulled the city's public grant database. It took him 20 minutes to find it. He almost missed it. Buried in a quarterly disbursement report filed 18 months ago under the Southside Uplift Initiative, a program Mayor Odom had launched in his second year in office to direct municipal funding toward small businesses in historically underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. The initiative had disbursed $340,000 across 22 recipients in its first cycle. Premier Image Salon and Spa, $16,500. Calvin read the entry 3 times. Then he pulled the original application, which was part of the public record, and found what he was looking for on page 4, the Community Commitment Statement, signed by Patricia Voss, dated 19 months ago, notarized, submitted to the City Office of Economic Development. He read it slowly. Premier Image Salon and Spa commits to providing welcoming, accessible, and inclusive services to all Atlanta residents, regardless of economic background, neighborhood of origin, or personal presentation. We understand that receipt of Southside Uplift Initiative funding constitutes an ongoing obligation to serve the community, not merely a financial benefit to the business. Patricia Voss's signature, her notary stamp, her promise. Calvin set the application down and picked up his phone. He called a former Premier Image employee named Keisha Monroe, who had quit 10 months ago and had already agreed, reluctantly, to speak on background. He asked her one specific question. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Hold on, I still have the group chat." She sent him screenshots, 6 of them. A group text from Patricia to her full staff, sent 8 days before the city fundraiser booking. Calvin read through them once, then stopped at the 4th message. "I need the right energy in here Saturday. We've worked too hard to build this clientele to have it disrupted. You all know what I mean. Keep it professional. Keep it clean. You all know what I mean." Calvin saved everything to a folder, made 2 backup copies, and called the mayor's press office at 9:15 p.m. The call went to voicemail. He left a detailed message outlining what he had found and offering the mayor's office the opportunity to respond before the story aired. His phone rang back 40 minutes later. It was not the press office. It was Stephen Odom's direct line. The press conference was held the following Tuesday at 11 a.m. The City Hall press room was standing room only. Every local outlet, 2 national network crews, bloggers with ring lights, podcasters with handheld recorders, 3 rows of print journalists with laptops open. In the back row, Gerald Pruitt sat with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has arrived early to watch something go badly for someone else. Calvin Marsh stood near the front, notebook open, pen still. Stephen Odom walked to the podium alone. No chief of staff at his elbow. No press secretary with printed talking points. No teleprompter. No American flag pin on his lapel. He gripped the edges of the lectern and looked out at the room. And for the first time since the story had broken, the mayor of Atlanta did not look like a politician. He looked like a man who had not slept in 4 days and had decided that sleep was a problem for later. "I'm not here to talk about policy today." The room shifted. Pens stopped. Cameras steadied. "I'm here to talk about something I should have talked about a long time ago." He took a breath. "Frank Odom is my father." The murmur rolled through the room like water over stone. Pruitt uncrossed his arms. Calvin didn't move. "He's 74 years old. He served this country. He came home and built a life and raised 2 children and loved a woman named Margaret for 43 years. And when she died, I let him grieve alone. Not because I didn't know, Because I was busy, because there was always something on the calendar that felt more urgent than a phone call. His jaw tightened. There wasn't. There never was. The room was perfectly silent. 3 weeks ago, a 28-year-old man named Deshaun Carter saw my father standing in a salon on Peachtree Corridor and did something I had failed to do for 7 years. He saw him. He gave him 20 minutes of his time and the kind of simple human dignity that shouldn't require courage to offer. But in that room, on that day, it did. And he was punished for it. Stephen's voice didn't break. It came close, and then it didn't. And the effort of that was visible. He was fired. He was blacklisted from every salon in this city. He was threatened online. Someone painted a slur on his grandmother's garage door. A pause. And through all of it, Deshaun Carter did not retaliate. He did not file a lawsuit. He did not sell his story. He set up a folding chair on a sidewalk and kept cutting hair. He let that sit. He was offered significant financial compensation to publicly condemn me. He turned it down. He said he would not be used as a weapon against an old man's son. Stephen looked down at his hands on the lectern for a moment. I don't deserve that kind of grace, but he gave it anyway. He straightened. Today, I'm announcing 3 actions. First, a full audit of every recipient of the Southside Uplift Initiative, beginning immediately with Premier Image Salon and Spa, which received $16,500 in public funds, while operating in direct violation of the community service pledge it signed to receive that funding. Pruitt's expression in the back row shifted. Second, a dedicated micro-grant program for independent barbers and cosmetologists operating in underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. If this city is serious about community investment, we fund the people actually doing the work. Calvin was writing fast. Third, and this is not from the mayor's office. This is from me, Stephen Odom, a son who wasn't there when he should have been. I owe Deshaun Carter an apology. Not because my administration failed him, although it did. Because I failed the man he helped, and Deshaun Carter paid for that failure with his livelihood. He looked directly into the center camera. In this city, doing the right thing will not cost you everything. Not on my watch. 2 seconds of silence. Then the room came apart. Not polite applause, not political applause, but the kind that starts in the chest and comes out before anyone decides to produce it. Pruitt sat very still in the back row. That evening, Stephen Odom drove to Glenwood Avenue alone. No security detail, no chief of staff. He parked on the street and walked to the building and took the stairs because the elevator was out of service and stood in front of apartment 4B and knocked. Frank opened the door. He looked at his son for a long time, long enough that the hallway felt smaller than it was. You look like you haven't eaten, Frank said. I haven't, Dad. I've got soup on the stove. Stephen stepped inside. On the kitchen counter, in a simple frame, Margaret smiled at something just outside the edge of the photograph. Stephen picked it up with both hands, carefully, the way you handle something you have been afraid to touch for 7 years, and held it for a long moment without speaking. Frank said nothing. He turned back to the stove. They ate soup at the small kitchen table, and the 6 years of silence sat between them like furniture in a dark room, present, solid, real. But for the first time, neither of them pretended it wasn't there. And that, after everything, was where it began. 6 weeks after Deshaun Carter lost his job over a $15 haircut, he stood on the sidewalk outside a storefront on Pryor Street and looked up at the sign going over the door. 2 men from the neighborhood, Bernard Hayes and a retired contractor named Otis, who had offered his services the same afternoon Calvin's segment aired, were lifting it into the iron brackets above the entrance, while Loretta stood on the sidewalk below, one hand shading her eyes, the other pointing with the authority of a woman who had waited a long time to point at something worth pointing at. "Left side up," she said. "Bernard, your left. Your other left. Miss Loretta, I drove a bus for 31 years. And how many signs did you hang?" Bernard adjusted the left side. The sign read, "Carter's. Every chair, every person." Inside, the shop was 900 square feet of possibility. Scuffed hardwood floors that Deshawn had refinished 3 times over 2 weekends, getting them wrong twice and right on the third attempt. The third coat going down on a Sunday night at 11 p.m. while Loretta sat in the corner with her crossword and kept him company without making it a thing. Walls painted a clean, warm white, a waiting area near the front window where the morning sun came through, long and level. 2 chairs and a small table with a pitcher of sweet tea that had been Loretta's contribution and was non-negotiable. 2 Barber chairs stood side by side in the center of the space. The first was new, chrome and black leather, bought with the city's micro-grant disbursement and a community fundraiser that Calvin Marsh's viewers had organized online in 96 hours. People Deshawn had never met sending $10, $25, $50 from across Atlanta and, in one case, from a woman in Memphis who said she'd watched the clip 7 times and needed to do something. The second chair was older. The leather was worn in the places where decades of hands had rested, and the iron base had been repainted once, imperfectly, sometime in the 1990s. It had spent the last 6 years in Loretta's storage unit, wrapped in a moving blanket, waiting. Mr. Willis from across the street had collected it on a Saturday morning in his truck, brought it to his garage, and spent 2 weekends restoring it without being asked and without mentioning it until it was done. He'd driven it over on a Thursday and set it inside the door and said, "Your grandfather would have wanted it back in a shop." Then he went home. It was Staff Sergeant Raymond Carter's original barber chair. On the wall behind the 2 chairs, Raymond's Army photograph in a simple dark frame, dress uniform, chest full of commendations, the serious face of a man saving his smiles for people he actually knew. Below it, a small hand-lettered sign painted by a neighbor's daughter who did calligraphy on weekends. For veterans, always free. On the windowsill, a small clay pot, slightly lopsided, green leaves catching the morning light. Frank had brought it on opening morning, carrying it carefully off the bus, holding it with both hands on his lap for 4 stops. "Margaret always said new beginnings deserve something living," he'd told Deshawn, holding it out. "I thought about it for a week before I decided that applied here." Deshawn had placed it on the sill without a word, in the spot where the light was strongest. Frank Odom was the first customer. 9:10 a.m., clean jacket, military pin on the lapel. He sat down in Raymond's chair. His chair now, though nobody had formally said so, and nobody needed to, and looked at himself in the mirror while Deshawn draped the cape around his shoulders. "The usual, Mr. Frank," Deshawn said. Frank looked at Deshawn's reflection and smiled. Not the careful, conserving kind of smile he'd been producing for the 14 months since Margaret died. A real one. The kind his face had apparently not forgotten how to make, just forgotten it was allowed to. "The usual," he said. The clippers hummed. Hair fell. The radio played something slow from a station mister. Willis had found and declared permanent. At 9:45, the bell above the door rang. Stephen Odom walked in. He was not in a suit. No security detail waited outside. No town car at the curb. He was wearing a plain jacket and carrying a small brown paper bag with 2 coffees, and he moved through the door with the slightly uncertain quality of a man entering a space he hasn't earned yet but is trying to. He set the coffees on the counter. He looked at his father in the chair. He looked at Deshawn. "My father tells me you're the best barber in Atlanta," he said. Deshawn didn't look up from the fade he was working. Your father's biased. A beat. But he's not wrong. Something moved across Stephen's face. Not quite a smile, not quite relief, something between the two that didn't have a clean name. He sat down in the waiting area by the window and picked up one of the coffees and watched his father get his hair cut and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. The shop filled slowly through the morning. Old neighbors from Pryor Street. New faces from Buckhead and Midtown who had seen the story and made the drive. Trey Washington, who had gotten the Kroger job, came in for a fresh cut and brought his younger brother. Mr. Earl, who had promised to pay Deshawn back when his pension came through, arrived at 10:30 with exact change and the dignity of a man honoring a debt. A woman named Gloria brought her grandson and stayed to watch, sitting in the corner with a cup of sweet tea and the expression of someone watching something they will describe to other people later. The chairs filled. The room filled. The space filled with the sound of clippers and conversation, and the particular laughter that happens when people are genuinely at ease, which is different from every other kind. Loretta sat by the door with her sweet tea and her crossword puzzle, and the look on her face that said everything she would never say out loud. The look of a woman who has been waiting patiently for the world to catch up to what she already knew. Premier Image Salon and Spa did not close overnight. The city audit ran for 3 weeks and found 4 violations of the Southside Uplift Pledge beyond the conduct that had already been documented. The $16,500 grant was clawed back in full. The political fundraiser crowd quietly redirected their bookings. 2 corporate clients canceled without explanation. Then the Yelp reviews, the real ones, from real clients who had seen the news, arrived in a wave, and Calvin's investigative piece aired in full, including Keisha Monroe's screenshots and the phrase "you all know what I mean" displayed on screen in Patricia's own font, her own words, her own group chat. Patricia Voss did not lose the building. She kept her license. She kept her marble floors and her white orchids and her glass front door. But she lost the thing that is harder to rebuild than any of those. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months later, she sat alone in the back of the empty salon, at the station nearest the supply closet, the smallest one, the one with the longest wait list until 6 weeks ago, and the chair was empty, and it stayed that way. 1 year after Carter's opened, the shop had 3 chairs, 2 employees, and a Saturday wait list that ran 2 weeks out. Frank came in every other Saturday. Same chair, same time. He had become a fixture, reading the paper in the corner between appointments, greeting every customer by name by the 3rd visit, telling stories about Margaret to anyone who showed any interest, and some who showed none but ended up glad they'd listened. Stephen came with him sometimes. Not every Saturday, but enough. Enough that it stopped feeling like an occasion and started feeling like a habit, which is what repair actually looks like when it's real. They were not fully healed. 7 years of silence doesn't dissolve in 12 months. But they were talking. They were trying. They were sitting in the same room without the silence expanding to fill it. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. On the last Saturday of the year, Deshawn swept the floor after close. The shop was empty. The radio played low. He leaned on the broom for a moment and looked at his grandfather's photograph on the wall. The serious face, the dress uniform, the man who had given him the clippers, and the belief that the chair doesn't choose who sits in it. He held that look for a long moment. Then he smiled, turned off the lights, and locked the door. Outside, the sign caught the light from the street lamp on Pryor Street. Carter's. Every chair, every person. Deshawn Carter didn't set out to change anything. He just saw an old man being ignored and decided that wasn't acceptable. That's all. One decision, made in 10 seconds, without calculation or strategy or any expectation of reward. But that's the thing about genuine kindness. It doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't ask permission, and it has no idea what it's about to set in motion. The chair never asked who was sitting in it. It never did. It was the people around it who forgot that. Don't be the people who forgot. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me about the moment someone saw you when they didn't have to. Those stories matter. Share this if someone in your life needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, you already know the answer to that.